Hi, welcome to Math Movies with Ms. Feuer-Beck and Ms. Veluti. Today we will be subtracting fractions with and without common denominators. We're going to start by subtracting fractions that have common denominators. So the first thing that we're going to look at today are fractions that have a common denominator here of 4. We have 3/4 and 1/4. So yes, they have the same denominator, and that's going to make our lives a lot easier because that means that the pieces are the same size. And in the first one, we have 3 pieces of that size, and in the second fraction, we have 1 piece of that size. So we could almost think about this as, some kind of a pie here. What we're dealing with is we have 3/4, and what we're saying is that we are taking away one of those fourths, and we're left with 2 of them. So yes, that means that we end up here with 2/4. We could also just say that we're going to keep the denominator the same, and we're going to subtract the numerators. That's where the 2 comes from. Every time we subtract fractions, we always want to make sure that we are simplifying to the lowest terms. So 2/4 is also equivalent to 1/2, and that's going to be our final answer, the most simplified form. So if we follow that same method with the problem below, we can see that because we're dealing with 2 fractions that have a common denominator, 5/7 minus 2/7, again, we can use the same methodology. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to keep our denominator the same, 7, and we're going to subtract 5 minus 2, which brings us to 3. So we're left with 3/7, and in this case, 3 and 7 do not have any common factors except 1, so that means that we are at its simplest form. The answer is 3/7. So we're going to continue on, and now we're going to be getting into subtracting fractions that have unlike denominators, and this adds an extra step to our process. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we are creating a common denominator, meaning that we create fractions that have the same denominator that are equivalent, and then we'll subtract, and if we need to, we will go ahead and reduce or simplify to the most simplified version of our fraction. So in this case, we have 7/8 minus 2/3. The denominators are different because we're dealing with 8 and we're dealing with 3. So what we need to do is I'm going to rewrite this fraction in a vertical form. That sometimes helps me when I'm doing these problems. And what I need to do now is I need to find a way to create a common denominator with 8ths and 3rds. Now, one way to do this is the least common denominator method, where you go ahead and you list a lot of multiples of 8 and a lot of multiples of 3, and you look for a common number. And sometimes when we get really good at this, we can do it in our heads. So some of you are probably realizing that the LCD in this case is 24. So what I'm doing now is I'm making equivalent fractions to 7/8 and 2/3 using 24ths. So in order to go from 8 to 24, what I'm really doing here is multiplying by 3, and that means I need to do the same thing to the numerator. When I do that, I get 21/24, and on the bottom here, when I'm multiplying by, is 8 in the numerator and the denominator to create common denominator in 24ths. So I go ahead and I multiply 2 times 8 to bring me to 16/24. Now I have to remember that I'm subtracting here, so I need to do 21/24 minus 16/24. The same way we did in the past, we're going to keep the 24ths as our denominator, and we're going to subtract 16 from 21, which brings me to 5/24. So at this point, I need to just stop and say, okay, am I done? Well, I need to see, can I simplify 5/24? And no, I cannot, because 5 does not have any factors in common with 24 except 1. So we are at its simplest form. And that means that 7/8 minus 2/3 is 5/24. All right, we're going to practice one more time with subtracting unlike denominators. So here we have 2/3 minus 4/15. Yes, they have different denominators, but we can still subtract because 2/3 is greater than 4/15. So again, I'm going to rewrite my fractions in a vertical form. And I need to think, okay, what is my common denominator when I'm working with thirds and I'm working with 15ths. And in this case, 15 is actually our LCD. So I don't need to change 4/15. I can actually just move that over here, and I'm going to leave that the same. But what I do need to do is I need to make an equivalent fraction for 2/3 using 15ths. Now I know to go from 3 to 15, I'm multiplying by 5, and I need to do the same thing in my numerator. So that's going to bring me to 10/15, and I'm now subtracting 4/15, and I have 6/15. So once again, I've completed my subtraction. The last step I need to do is say, can I simplify? Do 6 and 15 have any common factors that I could use to simplify? And yes, they do. They both have a factor of 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide both the numerator and the denominator by the common factor, and that's going to bring me to 2/5, and that's my final answer. 2/5 is equal to 6/15, and 2/5 is the simplest form. So hopefully you have learned some tips on how to subtract fractions with like and unlike denominators. Thank you.